Professor Thompson had been teaching physics for years, and if there was one thing he couldn't stand, it was students who were perpetually late and full of excuses. Michael was one such student, always arriving just in time to avoid being marked absent, always ready with a slick remark. One day, the professor decided he'd had enough. As Michael slipped into the classroom 10 minutes late, Thompson smirked and called him out. "Ah, Michael, glad you could join us. Let's test your knowledge. Tell me, what travels faster, light or sound?" Michael grinned. "That's easy, Professor. Light, obviously." "All right, why?" "Well, when I turn on my TV, I see the picture first, and then the sound comes," Michael answered confidently. The professor sighed and gave him a look that said, "Are you even trying?" Determined to prove that at least one student in the room had a functioning brain, he turned to another student. "All right, what do you think? What's faster, light or sound?" The student confidently replied, "Oh, sound, obviously." Professor Thompson blinked. "What? Why?" "Well, when I turn on my TV, I hear the sound first, and then the picture appears." A nerve twitched in the professor's forehead. Maybe the question is too abstract for them, he thought. He decided to simplify things. He turned to a third student. "All right, imagine you're standing at the foot of a mountain. At the top, a cannon is fired. Do you first see the flash or hear the sound?" The student confidently answered, "Oh, you see the flash first, of course." Relieved, the professor nodded. "Yes, and why is that?" The student grinned. "Well, the eyes are obviously in front of the ears." Professor Thompson gave up. 6-year-old twin boys had personalities as different as night and day. One was the ultimate pessimist, seeing the downside in everything. The other was a hopeless optimist, always finding a silver lining no matter the situation. Worried about their extreme attitudes, their parents took them to a psychiatrist for evaluation. First, the doctor decided to work with the pessimist, hoping to lift his spirits. He led the boy into a playroom filled with every toy imaginable: cars, action figures, board games, stuffed animals. But instead of excitement, the boy's eyes welled up with tears. "What's wrong?" the psychiatrist asked. "Don't you want to play with any of the toys?" "I do," the boy sniffled. "But if I play with them, I'll just end up breaking them." The psychiatrist sighed. "This is worse than I thought." Next, he turned to the optimist. To bring the boy down to reality, he took him to a room piled high with horse manure. Surely this would curb his unshakable cheerfulness, but instead of recoiling in disgust, the boy let out a delighted squeal, ran up the pile, and started digging with his bare hands. "What on earth are you doing?" the baffled psychiatrist asked. The boy beamed up at him and said, "With all this manure, there must be a pony in here somewhere." Growing up, Carol had a tough time because of his unusual name. The teasing, the jokes, it never seemed to end. But as he got older, he learned to embrace it, rising above the taunts. He even found love, marrying his high school sweetheart, who adored his uniqueness. When their first child was born, Carol let his wife choose the name, hoping to give their child a fresh start. Inspired by her husband's resilience, she named their daughter Love, believing it was a name that carried strength and warmth. But history has a way of repeating itself. Love, just like her father, faced relentless teasing at school. The cruel jokes wore her down. One day she stormed home furious. "Why did you give me such a stupid name?" she shouted at her dad. Carol, ever the protector, took the blame to spare his wife. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he said softly. In a fit of frustration, Love grabbed her toy dart gun and shot him in the chest before running off. Minutes later, Carol's wife arrived home to find him lying dramatically on the floor. "Oh my God, what happened?" she cried, rushing to his side. Carol weakly waved her closer, grasped her hand, and whispered his final words. "Shot through the heart, and you're to blame. Darling, you gave Love a bad name." One morning, two brothers, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, were out in the yard raking leaves when the older one had an idea. "You know what?" the 6-year-old said. "I think it's about time we started learning to cuss." The 4-year-old's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Yeah," the older boy said confidently. "When we go in for breakfast, I'm going to say something with hell, and you say something with ass." The 4-year-old nodded excitedly. It was a foolproof plan. A few minutes later, they walked into the kitchen where their mother was making breakfast. She turned to the 6-year-old with a warm smile. "What would you like for breakfast, sweetheart?" He crossed his arms, trying to sound grown up. "Oh, hell, Mom, I guess I'll have some Cheerios." Whack! Before he could process what happened, he was launched from his chair, tumbling across the floor. Tears welled up as he scrambled to his feet, only to find his furious mother in pursuit, swatting his rear with every step as he bolted upstairs. She locked him in his room and shouted, "You can stay there until I let you out." Then she marched back to the kitchen, her gaze now fixed on the 4-year-old. "And what do you want for breakfast, young man?" she asked, her voice like steel. The little boy swallowed hard. He glanced at the stairs where his brother had disappeared, then back at his mother. "I don't know," he muttered, "but you can bet your ass it won't be Cheerios." One afternoon, an older, tired-looking dog wandered into my yard. His collar was snug, and his well-fed belly told me he had a loving home. He approached me calmly, tail wagging gently, and I gave him a few pats on the head. Without hesitation, he followed me inside, walked down the hall as if he had done it 100 times before, curled up in a cozy corner, and promptly fell asleep. An hour later, he woke up, stretched, walked to the door, and I let him out. The next day, he returned, same routine. He greeted me in the yard, walked inside, found his usual spot in the hall, and drifted into another peaceful nap. This pattern continued for weeks. Curious about his story, I finally decided to send a message. I pinned a note to his collar. "I would like to find out who the owner of this wonderful, sweet dog is and ask if you are aware that almost every afternoon he comes to my house for a nap." The next day, my sleepy visitor arrived as usual, but this time with a reply pinned to his collar. "He lives in a home with 6 children, 2 under the age of 3. He's trying to catch up on his sleep. Please, may I come with him tomorrow?" A couple had 2 little boys, ages 8 and 10, who were known for their endless mischief. If trouble was brewing in town, you could bet they had a hand in it. Their parents, exhausted and desperate, didn't know what to do anymore. One day, the mother heard about a clergyman in town who had a reputation for straightening out wayward children. She decided to seek his help. The clergyman agreed to talk to the boys, but insisted on seeing them one at a time. The 8-year-old was sent in first. The clergyman sat him down, leaned in, and asked sternly, "Where is God?" The boy stared wide-eyed, saying nothing. The clergyman repeated, this time in an even firmer tone, "Where is God?" Still, the boy remained silent, gripping the edges of his chair. Frustrated, the clergyman raised his voice, shook his finger in the boy's face, and thundered, "Where's God?" At that, the boy jumped up, bolted from the room, ran straight home, and locked himself in the closet. His older brother, curious, followed him and knocked on the door. "What happened?" he asked. The younger boy, trembling, whispered, "We're in big trouble now. They can't find God and they think we did it." A country preacher had a teenage son, and the time had come for the boy to start thinking about his future. But like many young men, he didn't seem too concerned about it. One day, while the boy was at school, the preacher decided to conduct an experiment. He went into his son's room and placed 4 objects on the study table. A Bible. If he picks this up, he'll become a preacher like his father. What a blessing. A silver dollar. If he takes the money, he'll be a businessman. That would be fine, too. A bottle of Jack Daniels. If he chooses this, he's headed for a life of drinking. Lord, what a shame. A Playboy magazine. If he grabs this, he's destined to be a skirt-chasing troublemaker. Satisfied with his test, the preacher hid behind the door and waited. Soon the boy arrived home, tossing his books onto the bed. As he turned to leave the room, he noticed the items on his desk. Curious, he walked over and inspected them. First, he picked up the Bible and tucked it under his arm. Then, he grabbed the silver dollar and slipped it into his pocket. Next, he uncorked the bottle, took a long swig, and let out a satisfied sigh. Finally, he flipped open the magazine and whistled at the centerfold. The preacher, watching in horror, clutched his chest and gasped, "Lord have mercy! He's going to be the next president!" One afternoon, a little boy hopped onto a crowded city bus and eagerly took the seat right behind the driver. He was a chatty little thing, full of curiosity, and soon enough, he started talking. If my mom was a cow and my dad was a bull, I'd be a little calf, he said excitedly. The bus driver gave a polite nod, focusing on the road. If my mom was a hen and my dad was a rooster, I'd be a little chick, the boy continued. The driver glanced at him in the mirror but said nothing. If my mom was a deer and my dad was a buck, I'd be a little fawn. On and on the boy went, listing different animals and their offspring, his enthusiasm never wavering. If my mom was a duck and my dad was a goose, I'd be a little duckling. By this point, the driver was getting irritated. The boy just wouldn't stop. Every few seconds, another animal, another baby version of it. The driver sighed and, without turning around, grumbled, "All right, kid. What if your mom was a drunk and your dad was a bum?" Without missing a beat, the boy grinned and fired back, "I'd be a bus driver." The entire bus erupted in laughter, and the driver shook his head with a chuckle. He really should have seen that one coming. A little boy lived in the country with his father, and they had to use an old outhouse. The boy hated it. It was sweltering in the summer, freezing in the winter, and smelled terrible all year round. The outhouse sat on the bank of a creek, and the boy often dreamed of getting rid of it. One day, after a heavy spring rain, the creek swelled with water, and he saw his chance. He grabbed a big stick, pushed with all his might, and splash, Nayu, the outhouse tumbled into the creek and floated away. That evening, his father gave him a stern look at the dinner table. "Son, we're going to the woodshed after supper." The boy gulped. He knew what that meant. "Why, Dad?" he asked nervously. "Because someone pushed the outhouse into the creek today. It was you, wasn't it?" The boy hesitated, but decided to tell the truth. "Yes, sir, it was me. But, Dad, I read in school today that when George Washington chopped down a cherry tree, he told the truth and he didn't get into trouble." His father nodded. "That's true, son, but George Washington's father wasn't sitting in the cherry tree." One bright Sunday morning, Michael burst into the living room, his face beaming with excitement. "Mom, Dad, I have amazing news," he announced. "I'm getting married. She's the most beautiful girl in town. She lives just a block away, and her name is Susan." His parents exchanged a glance, and while his mother clapped her hands in delight, his father's smile faltered ever so slightly. Later that evening, Michael's father pulled him aside for a private talk. "Son, we need to have a serious conversation," he said, lowering his voice. "Look at your mother. She's a wonderful woman, a great wife, and an amazing mother. But, well, let's just say there wasn't always a lot of excitement in our marriage, so in my younger days, I had a few affairs." Michael's excitement began to fade. His father sighed. "One of those affairs resulted in a child, son. Susan is actually your half-sister. I'm so sorry, but you can't marry her." Michael was devastated, heartbroken. He ended things with Susan the next day. It took months for him to recover, but eventually he started dating again. A year later, he returned home, his eyes once again alight with joy. "Diane said, yes, we're getting married in June," he proudly announced. His father's face fell. "Michael, we need to talk." Michael's heart sank. His father sighed again. "Son, I hate to do this to you again, but Diane is also your half-sister." Michael was furious. He stormed out of the house, broke things off with Diane, and spent the next few days fuming. Finally, unable to take it anymore, he went to his mother. "Mom, Dad has ruined my life," he blurted out. "Every time I fall in love, he tells me the girl is my half-sister. What am I supposed to do? Am I never going to get married?" His mother listened patiently, then slowly shook her head with a smirk. "Oh, Michael," she said, patting his hand. "Sweetheart, don't listen to him." Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" She leaned in and whispered, "He's not even your real father." One sunny afternoon, a mother was driving her young daughter to a friend's house for a play date. As they cruised along, the little girl suddenly piped up from the back seat. "Mommy, how old are you?" The mother chuckled. "Honey, you're not supposed to ask a lady her age. It's not polite." The little girl thought about that for a moment, then tried a different question. "Okay, then how much do you weigh?" The mother sighed. "Now, really, That's another personal question. It's none of your business. The little girl frowned, but she wasn't giving up just yet. Well, why did you and Daddy get a divorce? The mother nearly swerved. That's enough questions, young lady, honestly. When they arrived at the friend's house, the mother shook her head, still exasperated, and walked inside. The little girl, now deep in thought, turned to her friend. My mom won't tell me anything about herself, she grumbled. Her friend shrugged and said, That's easy. Just look at her driver's license. It's like a report card for grown-ups. It has everything on it. Later that night, as her mother was tucking her into bed, the little girl grinned mischievously. Mommy, I know how old you are. You're 32. The mother blinked in surprise. How did you find that out? I also know that you weigh 140 pounds. Now the mother was downright shocked. How in heaven's name did you find that out? The little girl sat up proudly, a triumphant glint in her eyes. And I know why you and Daddy got a divorce. The mother froze. Oh, really? And why is that? With a big, innocent smile, the little girl announced, Because you got an F in sex. At a small middle school, the principal faced an unusual issue. A few older girls had started wearing lipstick. While he wasn't overly concerned about their makeup choices, he was concerned about what they were doing with it. After applying their lipstick, the girls had developed a habit of pressing their lips to the bathroom mirror, leaving smudgy kiss marks all over the glass. Every evening, the janitor had to scrub away the stains, only for the mirrors to be covered in fresh lip prints the next day. Before things got out of hand, the principal came up with a plan. At 2 p.m., he gathered all the lipstick-wearing girls in the school bathroom. They found him waiting with the janitor, who stood by with his cleaning supplies. The principal cleared his throat. Ladies, we have a problem. Every night, our janitor has to clean these mirrors because of your lipstick marks. It's more work than you might think, and I don't believe you fully understand how difficult it is. He turned to the janitor. Please, show them what you go through. The janitor nodded, took out a long-handled brush, dipped it in the nearest toilet, and then began scrubbing the mirror. The girls watched in horror as realization sank in. That was the last day anyone left a lipstick mark on the mirror. It was a night of chaos and excitement when a man rushed his pregnant wife to the hospital. She was carrying twins and the moment was finally here, but in his nervous excitement, he lost control of the car and, crash, they slammed into a massive oak tree. When the man woke up, the first thing he saw was the familiar mischievous grin of his older brother, the same grin that had preceded a lifetime of pranks, tricks, and questionable life choices. He groaned. Oh no, you're here. His brother chuckled. Good to see you too, mate. Panic set in as the man suddenly remembered why he was in the hospital. My wife, the babies, are they okay? Relax, his brother said, patting his arm. Everybody's fine. You got a beautiful, healthy baby boy and girl. Relief washed over him, but then his brother continued. There was just one little thing. The man narrowed his eyes. What? Well, you and your wife were both unconscious, and the hospital was in a real hurry to get the birth certificates done, so... His brother leaned in with that same devilish grin. I named them for you. The man's stomach dropped. Oh, no, what has he done now? He took a deep breath, bracing himself. All right, what did you name them? His brother smirked. I named your daughter Denise. The man let out a sigh of relief. Oh, that's actually a lovely name. Then, cautiously, he asked, And what about my son? His brother grinned wider. De nephew. A little boy wakes up 3 nights in a row to a strange thumping sound coming from his parents' bedroom. Curious, he peeks through the door and sees his mom bouncing up and down on his dad. The next morning, he asks, Mommy, every night I hear you and Daddy making noises, and when I look in, you're bouncing on him. What are you doing? His mom, caught off guard, quickly replies, Oh, sweetie, I'm just helping Daddy lose weight. When I bounce on his stomach, it makes him thinner. The boy thinks for a moment, then shakes his head. Well, that's not going to work. Why not? His mom asks. because as soon as you leave for work, the lady next door comes over and blows him back up. Johnny had just moved into his New York apartment and went down to the lobby to put his name on the mailbox. As he was doing so, the door to a nearby apartment opened, and out stepped a stunning young woman wearing only a robe. She smiled at Johnny, and they struck up a conversation. As they chatted, her robe slowly slipped open, revealing, well, everything. Poor Johnny started sweating, desperately trying to keep his eyes on hers. After a few moments, she gently placed a hand on his arm and whispered, "Let's go inside. I hear someone coming." Johnny, flustered but eager, stepped into her apartment. As soon as she shut the door, she leaned against it and let her robe fall to the floor, completely naked. She purred, "Tell me, what do you think is my best feature?" Johnny, still red-faced and struggling to speak, gulped and squeaked out, your ears?" She blinked in shock. "My ears? Look at me. Out of all that, why on earth would you pick my ears?" Johnny swallowed hard and cleared his throat. "Because when you said you heard someone coming outside, that was me." A teacher asked her young students to bring a family story with a moral to share with the class. The next day, Joe went first. "My dad is a farmer, and we have chickens. One day we were taking a basket full of eggs to market, but we hit a big bump in the road, and all the eggs broke." "And what's the moral of the story?" "Hi," the teacher asked. "Don't put all your eggs in one basket." "Very good," the teacher said. Next, Mary shared her story. "We had 20 eggs waiting to hatch, but only 10 chicks made it." "And the moral? Don't count your chickens before they hatch." "Excellent," said the teacher, pleased. Then it was Barney's turn. He took a deep breath and began. "My dad told me a story about my Aunt Karen. She was a flight engineer in the war. Her plane got hit, and she had to parachute into enemy territory with nothing but a bottle of whiskey, a machine gun, and a machete." The classroom fell silent. The teacher, intrigued, urged him on. "Go on, Barney." Aunt Karen drank the whiskey on the way down to prepare herself. She landed right in the middle of 100 enemy soldiers. She shot 70 of them with her machine gun until she ran out of bullets. Then she took down 20 more with her machete before the blade broke. And then she finished off the last 10 with her bare hands. The teacher's face went pale. "Good heavens! And what was the moral of this terrifying story?" Barney grinned. "Stay away from Aunt Karen when she's drunk." Miss Williams, a first-grade teacher, was having trouble with one of her students. "Jerry, what's your problem?" she asked. Jerry crossed his arms. "I'm too smart for the first grade. My sister is in third grade, and I'm smarter than she is. I think I should be in the fifth grade." Miss Williams, fed up with Jerry's attitude, took him to the principal's office. After hearing the teacher's concerns, the principal decided to test Jerry. "All right, young man, if you can answer these questions, we'll see about moving you up." He started with some basic math. "Principal, what is 3 by 3 inches?" Jerry, 9. "Principal, what is 6 by 6 inches?" Jerry, 36. This went on with every question the principal thought a third grader should know. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "Well, Miss Williams, I think Jerry belongs in third grade." But Miss Williams wasn't convinced. "Let me ask him a few questions." The principal agreed, and Jerry nodded confidently. Miss Williams, "What does a cow have 4 that I have only 2 of?" Jerry, "Legs." Miss Williams, "What is in your pants that you have but I do not?" The principal stiffened in his chair. Jerry, "Pockets." Miss Williams, "What does a dog do that a man steps into?" Jerry, "Pants." The principal's eyes widened. Miss Williams, "What starts with A, C, ends with a T, is hairy, oval, delicious, and contains thin, whitish liquid." Jerry, "Coconut." The principal sat forward, mouth slightly open. Miss Williams, "What goes in hard and pink, then comes out soft and sticky?" The principal nearly choked, but Jerry confidently answered, "Bubble gum." Miss Williams smirked. "What does a man do standing up, a woman does sitting down, and a dog does on 3 legs?" The principal braced himself. Jerry, "Shake hands." The principal was visibly sweating. Miss Williams, "What word starts with F and ends in K and means a lot of heat and excitement?" The principal gasped. Jerry, "Fire truck." The principal exhaled, wiping his forehead. He turned to Miss Williams and said, "Put Jerry in the 5th grade. I got the last 7 questions wrong." A little girl sits on the couch next to her grandpa, studying his face with a puzzled expression. After a moment, she reaches out and gently runs her fingers over his wrinkles. Then she touches her own smooth cheeks, frowning in thought. Her grandpa chuckles and asks, "Something on your mind, sweetheart?" She thinks for a second and then asks, "Grandpa, did God make you?" "He sure did, honey. Many, many years ago," he replies. "Did God make me too?" she asks. "Of course, but that wasn't too long ago," he says with a smile. The little girl nods, looks back at his face, and says, "Boy, God's gotten a lot better at it, huh?" As the crowded airliner prepared for takeoff, the peaceful hum of anticipation was suddenly shattered by the piercing screams of a 5-year-old boy. Seated near the front, the child had chosen this very moment to unleash a full-blown tantrum, flailing, kicking the seat in front of him, and wailing loud enough to make the engines seem quiet in comparison. His mother, red-faced and visibly exhausted, tried everything: soothing words, firm warnings, bribery. But nothing worked. Passengers exchanged weary glances. A few sighed, others muttered under their breath. It was clear that this was going to be a very long flight. Then, from the rear of the plane, an elderly man in the crisp uniform of an Air Force general slowly stood up. With an air of quiet authority, he began making his way down the aisle. Passengers watched in curious silence as he approached the flustered mother, raising a hand to stop her attempts to calm the boy. Then, without a word, he leaned down to the child's level and pointed to the decorations on his uniform: his pilot's wings, his service stars, his battle ribbons. He whispered something into the boy's ear. Instantly, as if a switch had been flipped, the child's eyes widened, his tiny hands dropped to his lap. He sniffled once, nodded solemnly, then, without another word, took his mother's hand and quietly fastened his seatbelt. The cabin erupted into spontaneous applause. As the general turned and made his way back to his seat, a flight attendant, still astonished, reached out and gently touched his sleeve. "Excuse me, General," she whispered, "but what exactly did you say to him?" The old man gave a knowing smile and replied softly, "I showed him my wings, my stars, and my ribbons. And I explained that they entitle me to throw one passenger out of the plane on any flight I choose." It was a bright Sunday morning, and the playground outside the church was filled with laughter and the sound of children running about. Miss Smith, the ever-patient Sunday school teacher, stood nearby, keeping a watchful eye on her students. As she strolled past the swings, she spotted little Johnny standing with his face scrunched up in a comically exaggerated grimace, sticking his tongue out at a group of giggling classmates. Miss Smith sighed and walked over. "Johnny," she said gently, "that's not very nice. You shouldn't make faces like that." Johnny shrugged. "Why not?" She smiled, recalling an old piece of wisdom passed down from her own childhood. "Well, when I was your age, I was told that if I made ugly faces, my face would freeze that way forever." Johnny stopped, furrowing his brow as if deep in thought. Then, after a brief pause, he looked up at her with innocent eyes and said matter-of-factly, "Well, Miss Smith, you can't say you weren't warned." After years of working under others, Rebecca finally took the plunge. She started her own investment firm. Sharp, diligent, and relentless, she quickly built a reputation for success. Business flourished, and before long, she realized she needed an in-house lawyer to handle the legal side of things. Determined to hire someone with integrity, she began interviewing candidates. One morning, a young lawyer named Daniel Peterson sat across from her in the sleek, glass-walled office. She glanced at his resume, then leaned forward. "Mr. Peterson, as I'm sure you understand, trust is everything in this business. Our integrity must be beyond question." She fixed him with a firm gaze. "So tell me, are you an honest lawyer?" Daniel straightened his tie. "Honest? Let me tell you something about honesty." He took a breath, his expression earnest. "My father lent me $15,000 for law school, and I paid back every single penny the minute I won my very first case." Rebecca raised her eyebrows, impressed. That's remarkable. What kind of case was it? Daniel hesitated, shifting slightly in his chair. Then, with a sheepish grin, he admitted, he sued me for the money. At NC State University, 4 sophomore students were acing their organic chemistry class. They had breezed through every quiz, midterm, and lab, and each of them carried a solid A heading into the final. Feeling invincible, they decided to celebrate early. The weekend before their big exam, they took a road trip to the University of Virginia to party with some friends. The celebrations stretched late into the night, and after a weekend of hard partying, they overslept on Sunday, missing their ride back to Raleigh. By the time they finally returned on Monday morning, the final exam had already taken place. Desperate, they scrambled to find their professor and explained their unfortunate predicament. "Professor, we had every intention of returning in time for the final, but we got a flat tire on the way back. We didn't have a spare and couldn't get help for hours. By the time we got back, it was too late." The professor listened thoughtfully, then nodded. "I understand. These things happen. I'll allow you to take a makeup exam tomorrow." Relieved beyond belief, the 4 friends thanked him profusely and spent the rest of the day cramming. The next morning, they arrived for the exam, feeling confident. The professor separated them into 4 different rooms and handed each of them a test booklet. Opening the first page, they saw a straightforward question worth 5 points, something simple about free radical formation. Piece of cake, each of them thought as they quickly jotted down their answers. Then they turned to the next page. Written in bold letters was just one question worth 95 points. Which of your tires was a flat?